In this video, you'll take a trip into the magical world of construction, at the point when a natural disaster strikes. An earthquake, say, or a twister, one, as a rule, doesn't hear much about the structures that withstood the powers of nature. This is a disgrace since it implies that the tales behind these tough designs never get told. These accounts of designing inventiveness, complex estimations, creative reasoning, and whip-smart problem-solving are what these chapters set out to tell. Along the way, you'll improve your grasp of the historical backdrop of primary designing, just as a more full comprehension of the logical ability and imaginativeness behind the structures we live and work in, and the incredible structures we snap self-eyes in front of. In these chapters, you'll also find out why human crap was at one time a coveted resource, instructions to get to the water in a parched nation, and which creature is a decent model for a structure. An engineer's job is to build structures that can withstand the powers of nature. On August 27, 1907, high over Canada's St. Lawrence River, a team of 86 laborers was building the Quebec Bridge. Development had been in progress for a very long time, however. On that decisive evening, a huge segment of the extension collapsed. The disaster lasted for 20 seconds, and 75 laborers lost their lives. Unfortunately, it's typically just when something like this occurs, when a central specialist makes a miscount and disaster follows, that underlying design enters the news. However, the victories of underlying designing abound. Each unblemished structure is a demonstration of the profound arrangement that architects have of nature's powers, and of the pressure those powers apply to artificial constructions. Broadly talking, there are two sorts of power that put weight on constructions: pressure and strain. At the point when weight is set on an article, power streams down from the weight, placing the item under pressure. For example, when you stand up standing, your legs are under pressure, supporting the power applied by your body weight. Interestingly, when weight is hung from an object, power streams down and away from the item, placing it under pressure. For instance, if you somehow happen to get a bowling ball, your arm would be in strain. In the event that we couldn't channel these powers, we'd be unequipped for building anything. In this way, from the beginning, we devised systems intended to do exactly that. Our ancient forefathers absolutely realized how to channel pressure, regardless of whether just naturally. It should be obvious. Their first constructions were single-story mud cottages, which utilized the heap-bearing framework. The heaviness of the structure was directed down through its thick mud dividers, placing them in pressure. Eventually, our forefathers additionally found out about pressure when they accessed appropriate trees. They started assembling houses by lashing logs together. They'd at that point seal the construction against the components by hanging creature pelts or woven plants over it. In contrast to the mud cabins, these designs utilized the casing framework. The heaviness of the construction was diverted through the logs, which, by pushing against one another, were under pressure and strain. And the two frameworks we concocted to channel them have been vital to development since the primary structures were raised. What's more, they're no less significant today. Modern buildings utilize many of the same components as in the earliest days of construction. A considerable number of specialists were first bitten by the structure bug as kids, and a lot of them encountered the miracles of development while playing with their first Lego set. Also, present-day structures aren't the same as Lego developments. Each is composed of a variety of smaller components. Take essentially any construction, and you'll see that its edge is made of an organization of pillars, supports, segments, and brackets. Sections are upstanding columns, and they're generally used to channel pressure. Old Greeks and Romans perfected the utilization of segments, transforming these vertical segments of a construction's edge into a type of workmanship. Particularly amazing are the sections of the Parthenon in Athens and those of the Roman Forum in Rome. Bars are long, strong, even backings, generally made of wood, steel, or fortified cement. They are what's ordinarily used to shape the skeletons of floors and roofs. When remained upon, or when roofing material is laid across them, they channel the load out to the segments whereupon they rest. The areas of a casing that are neither even horizontal nor vertical are known as braces or struts, in the event that space is excessively enormous for pillars to traverse unassisted. At that point, brackets can be utilized to give additional solidness. Brackets are three-sided strong systems made out of segments, pillars, and swaggers. They're more functional than radiates, since the segment parts are effectively movable and can be assembled nearby, and their three-sided shape is inalienably steady. Supports are frequently utilized in the development of bridges. For a renowned model, investigate the Golden Gate Bridge. Running its length, you can see a three-sided design. These are supported grinding away. The edges of most designs utilize just these for fundamental parts. However, a few structures are extra large to such an extent that they require a bonus, a center. You can consider the center of a structure's spine. Centers are normally made of steel or cement, and they help channel outside powers. On the off chance that solid breezes, or some other power, yet the structure under pressure, the halfway found center injects it, diverting it down and scarcely flexing, making the structure practically difficult to overturn. Other present-day structures adopt an alternate strategy. Rather than an inside center, they utilize an outside casing. To celebrated models are the Gherkin. In London and Paris Centre Pompidou, structural engineers need to withstand wind and earthquakes. Among different powers of nature, gravity isn't a power to be messed with. However, in any event it's anticipated, which is beyond what one can say about a portion of the other common powers that designers need to manage. Wind can withstand a particularly tricky issue. For modestly estimated structures, the breeze normally is certifiably not a significant issue. A specialist basically needs to quantify the structure site's ordinary breeze speed and consider a couple of different things: how far the site is from the sea, how high it is above ocean level, and what the encompassing landscape resembles. With this, she can precisely compute the seriousness of the breeze power. The confusions increment dramatically for high rises. Rather than conceptual figurines, the designer should build a to-scale model of the high rise, just as the encompassing landscape, and afterward test it in an airstream. High rises are among the structures that require a center. At the same time, at times, a center isn't sufficient to keep them from influencing in the breeze. Thus, some supersized structures utilize a tuned mass damper. A tuned mass damper is a gigantic pendulum situated in a structure's middle. At the point when the wind hits, the pendulum coordinates the structure's reverberation recurrence, swinging the other way of the structure's influence and canceling the breeze's power. The Taipei 101. A 500-meter tower in Taiwan has a tremendous damper situated between the 87th and 92nd floors. It weighs 660 tons, and it's now saved the tower at any rate once. In 2015, when Typhoon Soudler hit Taiwan, Taipei 101 stayed upstanding. However, its damper recorded 1 meter of development. In any case, the breeze isn't all architects should fight with. They've additionally had the opportunity to consider tremors, which can be neutralized with different sorts of dampers, to work in a quake-inclined district. A specialist should do a little research. She must investigate the frequencies of past shudders and be certain that the structure she's dealing with doesn't have a comparable characteristic recurrence, which is estimated by deciding how often every second an article vibrates when upset. Or on the other hand, one can mount the construction sections on orientation, huge elastic cushions that retain a lot of vibration, in this way easing the power of any shakes that may happen. One more strategy is to put dampers between a design's segments, bars, and supports. For example, the Torre Mayor, a gigantic pinnacle in Mexico City, is nearly seismic tremor evidence on account of an organization of water-driven safeguards masterminded in X examples all through the structure's casing. In one event, a huge 7.6 size tremor hit the city. Not exclusively did the Torre Mayor climb it whole, yet the individuals inside had no clue that there had even been a quake by any means. Disasters have a great arrangement to show us better building practices. In 1968, in Canning Town, London, Ivy Hodge murdered 4 individuals by attempting to make some tea. Hodge lived in a high-rise building made of pre-assembled solid squares, which were held together by simply grating in a limited quantity of cement. Lamentably, on that day in 1968, a deficient heater had been spilling gas into Hodge's loft, so when she went to light the oven, there was a little blast. Despite the fact that it didn't break Hodge's eardrums, the impact blew down her kitchen divider, which had been supporting the boards of the apartment above. These boards immediately collapsed, accelerating the breakdown of the boards on the floor underneath and the floor beneath that, etc., until a side of the high-rise lay in ruin, and 4 individuals had been murdered in their beds. This misfortune showed designs of some vital exercises. In reality, if history weren't loaded up with endless breakdowns, current specialists wouldn't be half as acceptable at making such tough designs today. First of all designers deserving at least some respect realize that a construction segment parts should be solidly attached to each other, and that it's absolutely critical to prevent the disproportionate effect, which refers to when a structure has a single purpose of disappointment. Truth be told, one of current history's most popular breakdowns, the fall of the World Trade Center's Twin Towers, was the consequence of designing imperfections. Raised in 1973, the Twin Towers each flaunted a strong center, made of steel, just as an outside casing that had been extraordinarily intended to withstand a plane crash. Nonetheless, the planes of 1973 couldn't hold as much fuel as those of 2001, and the blasts as the planes struck the pinnacles were bigger than the first specialists had envisioned they'd be. So huge, truth be told, that the defensive paint covering the edges, steel sections, and shafts was harmed, alongside the gypsum boards that protected the center against fire. The fire spread rapidly, and the warmth got extraordinary. Before long, it was near 1000 Celsius, and the unprotected sections started to fall flat, making the higher floors break down upon the lower. Since this fiasco, engineers have started planning towers with stable, solid centers. This gives solidness, while additionally giving individuals a break course if disaster strikes. The resources of modern structural engineering have a long history. You've without a doubt seen a block building. You may even live in one. Yet, did you realize that blocks have been around for over 11,000 years? Back in 9000 BCE, the Neolithic occupants of Jericho put blocks to broad use, subsequent to trim bits of dirt into harsh blocks. They'd let them dry in the sun, after which they'd use them to develop their colony-molded houses. This was the strategy until around 2900 BCE, when the individuals of the Indus Valley started utilizing furnaces to fire and solidify their blocks. In any case, the block-making bosses of the antiquated world were the Romans. They knew about the ideal sort of earth and realized precisely how long a block should dry for. Furthermore, they utilized blocks for everything, particularly curves. Curves are ideal for holding up heavy loads by utilizing pressure, and blocks demonstrated ideal for curve building. Unfortunately, the craft of block making that the Romans had idealized was lost when the Roman Empire fell in 476 A. It would be 600 years before such superb blocks, or such attractive block curves, were seen again in the West. Be that as it may, it's not about the block. In reality, blocks aren't anything without mortar. In Old Egypt, gypsum plaster was utilized to hold blocks together. In any case, since gypsum breaks down in water over the long haul, it demonstrated a lacking glue. Forced to look for another option, the Egyptians concocted a combination of lime mortars that developed further as it dried, and could keep going a long, long time. In Old China, mortar advancements were likewise in progress. For instance, they put sticky rice in the mortar utilized in the Great Wall, which gave it more adaptability, something mortar needs altogether not to break in an outrageous climate. Metal additionally has a long history, however. It didn't turn into a feasible development material until moderately as of late, in spite of the fact that the Iron Age started over 2,200 years prior. It wasn't until the 19th century, when it got conceivable to mass-produce steel, that structures began routinely consolidating metal. In 1856, a man named Henry Bessemer found a down-to-earth strategy for eliminating all the pollutants from iron. He took a heater and diverted a current of warm air through it, along these lines making an exothermic response, and temperatures sufficiently high to burn contaminations that couldn't be eliminated in a coal heater. After this cycle, it was easy or simple to add an exact proportion of carbon to the metal, invigorating it extra, and presto, the time of steel had unfolded. At the point when Bessemer passed on in 1898, in excess of 12 million tons of steel had been created all around the world. Concrete isn't as exhausting as you might suspect from the outset. Cement probably won't appear to be an especially energizing substance. Yet, without it, a portion of the world's most amazing constructions, from Rome's monstrous 2,000-year-old Pantheon to the transcending high-rises of today, could never have been assembled. Concrete is a complex entire made from basic parts. Here's the essential formula. Take some limestone and earth, blend all together. Heat blends to 1,450 Celsius until it wires into knots. Pay the piper, and crush them to a powder. This powder is cement. At the point when you add water to the concrete, you'll have a substance that, when dry, is really solid. In case you're lacking in concrete, you can place it in some sand or rock, which will build the blend's volume without subverting its vigor. What's more, the writing is on the wall: concrete. This unassuming substance has some surprising characteristics, and it's ideal for large development projects. Solid designs can likewise be given a role as a solitary piece so that there are no powerless focuses. Though block constructions will consistently be more fragile where the mortar holds them together, solid designs have the advantage of being consistently fundamentally stable. Be that as it may, in spite of these geniuses, there is a con in solid: it's terrible at opposing strain. This was an issue until the 1860s, when a French groundskeeper named Joseph Monnier hit upon an answer. Monnier's earth pots had a bothering tendency: they'd frequently break. Monnier began making pots out of cement, however. He found that these did precisely the same thing. So he got innovative. He took some metal wire and made such a grid. With this, He strengthened his solid pots, and the outcome was fantastic. The capacity of the solid to oppose pressure and of the wire to oppose strain amounted to a strikingly solid material. In 1867, Monnier displayed his development at the Paris Expo, and right up till today, fortified cement is still among the most flexible and durable development materials out there. Modern constructions reach for the sky. Skyscrapers are naturally representative. They're symbolic of a portion of humankind's most noteworthy characteristics. Our aspiration, for example, and our endless limit with regards to advancement. However, it's just as of late that we've really begun developing structures as high as our assumptions. For nearly 4,000 years, the world's tallest design was the Great Pyramid of Giza, finished in 2560 BCE, which, at 146 meters tall, was quite short by the present norms. At that point, beginning in the 14th century, a progression of churches exchanged the qualification of tallest structure, with one house of prayer losing it to another at whatever point its tower snapped off in an unpleasant climate. The principal high-rise, Chicago's home insurance building, wasn't built until 1884. From that point forward, our capacity to build enormous designs has expanded extensively. The Eiffel Tower, which was finished in 1889, remains at an amazing 300 meters. However, it's overshadowed by the present tallest structure, Dubai's Burj Khalifa, which towers at a bewildering 828 meters. Be that as it may, such stature wouldn't be practicable without lifts, specifically the security lift. Despite the fact that lifts have been around for centuries, they weren't protected until generally as of late. One snapped rope, and genuine injury or demise could result. This issue was helped by a man named Elisha Otis, who was once entrusted with exhausting out a New York distribution center. Tired of physically moving items from floor to stockroom floor, Otis concocted an approach to do it precisely. He joined a cart spring, which lies level when packed and retires from delivered, to a pivoted outline that ran along a scored direct rail. However long the link from which the lift depends stays whole. The strain packs the spring. If the link breaks, be that as it may, the spring bows out, which powers the edge to secure in the indents and the lift to stop. In 1853, at New York's World's Fair, Otis demonstrated his creation, and under 5 years after the fact, the main steam-controlled well-being lift was introduced. These lifts permitted individuals to reach ever higher stories. Today, lifts are utilized by about 7 billion individuals at regular intervals. A design's destiny can be determined by the ground upon which it sits, before drawing up any outlines or making any arrangements. A specialist needs to know nearly everything about the ground he'll be expanding on. In the event that he doesn't, there can be not kidding long-term outcomes. Take Mexico City, for instance, whose recorded focus has sunk by about 10 meters throughout the most recent 150 years. The territory has been dangerous for many years. In fact, it used to be a lake called Lake Texcoco. In 1325, the Aztecs constructed a city on an island in this lake and named it Tenochtitlan. To get to Tenochtitlan, you needed to stroll along with one of numerous mud and soil interstates, which were upheld by wooden heaps and associated the city to the territory. These interstates were so all around assembled that they actually work as Mexico City's primary streets. In the 16th century, Spanish conquistadors demolished the Aztec city and fabricated a city on the establishments of the gigantic Aztec sanctuaries. Simultaneously, they felled all the encompassing trees, which brought about disintegration and continuous floods. At the point when the Spanish chose to extend the city, they brought about additional issues by filling the lake with soil, which raised the water table. The issue was that, at whatever point it came down, there were large floods. This issue wasn't settled until the 20th century, when a progression of underground streams was built to cart away the abundance of water. During this time, the city kept on sinking. The Metropolitan Cathedral is a genuine illustration of the overall issue. The House of God's fashioners was entirely mindful that a particularly huge construction would before long start to sink into Mexico City's wet soil. Along these lines, in 1573, when development initiated, they previously constructed a colossal stage known as a pontoon establishment to help the church building. However, this arrangement had a blemish. The dirt is based on wasn't consistently conservative. Thus, by 1910, the Metropolitan Cathedral had an articulated slant. One corner stood a decent point for meters over the other. To address this stressing slant, Dr. Ephraim Ovando Shelley developed a model of the pinnacle, with genuine soil tests from underneath the church, in this way reproducing how much the different areas of soil had packed during the basilica's set of experiences. Furnished with this information, Ovando Shelley and his group penetrated 30 to access shafts. These shafts contained a sum of 1,500 extraction openings. every somewhere close to 6 and 22 meters in length. Through these openings, they eliminated 4,000 to 120 cubic meters of soil. This generally amended the slant, and it ought to guarantee less lopsided soaking later on. Civilizations. Similar to trees, keep an eye on spring up any place there's water. In any case, regardless of whether there's not single water to be found, underlying specialists have methods of discovering it. Without a doubt, inventive architects have been tracking down water hotspots for millennia. In Iran, there's a large, dry level encompassed by the desert. A while ago, when this area was important for Old Persia, clean water sources were scant. This constrained Persians to think of an answer, and the outcome was a shrewd development called a keres. Building a keres is a bit of a cycle. To begin with, you delve an opening into the side of a slope. In the event that you don't locate any sodden soil, it's an ideal opportunity to search for another slope and begin burrowing once more. When you discover dampness, you move to the subsequent advance, which is to leave a basin in the sodden piece of the opening for a couple of days, on the off chance that the can starts to gather water. That implies you've discovered a spring, an underground store of water in the stone. The third step is to dig a progression of openings down through the slope, making a line of wells. It's significant that each well is somewhat more profound than the one preceding it. So when you proceed onward to the fourth step, interfacing every one of these wells by digging a level passage between them, the water streams to the slope space where it tends to be effectively reached. Iran contains an expected 35,000 keres, and a large number of them, like the 2,700-year-old keres in the city of Ghanabad, which actually furnishes the city's 40,000 residents with water, are still being utilized today. In any case, you don't have to live in a desert to struggle to discover enough consumable water. Simply think about Singapore, a little island with more than 5 million occupants. Despite the fact that encompassed by the sea, the individuals who live there have never had a safe water source for quite a while. Singapore acquired its water from Malaysia. However, Singapore would not like to be subject to another country, realizing that a dry spell or struggle could prompt a philanthropic calamity. So Singapore became a water management leader. Today, Singapore gathers 90% of its water, more than some other country on the planet. It additionally reuses a lot of wastewater. And in 2005, it opened its first desalination plant, which produces 30 million gallons of consumable water each day. These developments alone give 50% of Singapore's water. By 2060, that rate should increase to 85. The historical backdrop of human waste contains a historical backdrop of progress. How a culture handles human waste is a very decent pointer of how exceptional that culture is. Japan is a valid example. Back in the Middle Ages, Japanese farmers were lacking in fertilizer. There weren't a lot of domesticated animals on the island, however. The human population was expanding and required food. In this way, to prepare their harvests, the farmers started utilizing human excrement, or, as it was classified, night soil. Furthermore, soon enough, there was a thriving business sector for the staff. Truth be told, it turned out to be so worthwhile to sell crap that laws were passed that made property managers the lawful landlords of their occupants' dung. Regardless, stayed the property of its maker. By the mid-1700 seconds, monopoly rights had been allowed to societies and affiliations whose sole design was to set reasonable costs for crap. Yet, notwithstanding these efforts to implement decency, the expense remained irrationally high, and numerous farmers gambled detainment by appropriating crap. Notwithstanding its imperfections, this framework was effective as far as possible up to the 20th century, so all things considered, a population blast caused some disagreeable issues. In 66% of Japanese urban communities, the sewage frameworks were completely lacking. London is another city that is needed to manage too much poop. In a real sense, for most of London's set of experiences, all human waste, defecation, pee carcasses, and so on, was essentially tossed into the Thames or one of the more modest waterways streaming into it. Obviously, floods of obnoxiousness came about because of this, including far and wide episodes of cholera. At last, things got so gross that Parliament had to make a move. In 1858, London encountered a really sweltering summer. Its cesspits, each of the 200,000, just as the altogether befouled Thames, started to cook. A foul smell before long loomed over the whole city. The incomparable stink, as it got known, drove the House of Commons to follow up on what had for quite some time been proposed, the advancement of a sewer framework. Joseph Basil Jett, The man relegated to planet formulated an organization of passages which would run underneath the Thames and its feeders and complete the cities lost to the ocean a long way from the general population. Fortunately, Bazalgette foresaw the development of that populace and furthermore contemplated that nobody would need to assemble another framework later on. Thus he developed sewers that could deal with the misuse of around 4 million individuals, twice as numerous as then lived in the city. The existence of the individuals living there has been greatly improved from that point forward. A handful of exploring women have battled sexual biases in the field of engineering. It's difficult to be a lady in a male-dominated industry. Being a lady and attempting to direct a genuine conversation with development laborers who are prone to stick pictures of bare women to the divider is, without a doubt, tricky. So it's significant for hopeful female architects to draw motivation from an earlier time. Simply take Emily Warren Roebling, who, however, never prepared officially, finished the development of the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. Emily had consistently cherished design, so it was nothing unexpected when she wedded Washington Roebling, who'd chosen to continue in the strides of his dad, the popular designer John Augustus Roebling. At the point when Washington went to Europe to contemplate development procedures, Emily went as well and assisted with his exploration. In 1865, the year that Emily and Washington wedded, John Augustus Roebling was contracted to plan and develop a scaffold between New York and Brooklyn. Tragically, only a brief time after development initiated, John Augustus got a lockjaw and passed on. So Washington, the undeniable replacement, accepted the job of a head engineer. Yet, one more misfortune was close to the corner. Washington, who'd been investing loads of energy in the pressurized, watertight chambers used to chip away at the extension's establishments, got the curves and needed to leave the structure site. Fortunately, Emily was prepared to take care of business. She previously recorded all her better half's directions and afterward, stressing that he probably won't recuperate, started taking care of his correspondence and examining progress science and complex designing standards. Before adequately long, Emily expected the entirety of Washington's jobs. She chipped away at the site and discussed it straightforwardly with the specialists. However, in spite of her sturdy administration, the development experienced issues, and another central architect was nearly found to supplant Washington. Eventually, however, the city permitted Washington to finish the task as a substitute, and his intermediary, Emily, was there, remaining next to President Chester Arthur when the scaffold was opened to the general population in 1883. Structural engineering has a brilliant future. You currently know an extraordinary arrangement about designing set of experiences. Be that as it may, shouldn't something be said about its future, all things considered? As new advancements keep on arising, it is by all accounts getting more splendid and more brilliant. Here's an examining of some less expensive present-day development strategies that may begin supplanting pricey, obsolete ones. It costs a ton to construct the pressed wood molds for solid designs. For sure, the form regularly devours a greater amount of the structure's spending plan than the actual structure, and it's typically tossed out subsequently. An option in contrast to this inefficient and excessive strategy is utilizing molds made of plastic. In contrast to rigid, pressed wood molds, plastic molds are malleable, generally modest, and effectively movable. Furthermore, since plastic and cement don't bond, plastic molds could even be reused. In spite of the fact that this thought was concocted during the 1950s, it's as of late began to acquire a foothold. At that point, there's 3D printing, which is as of now opening up new designing vistas. On account of 3D printing, segment parts can be created at much lower costs and produced using reused materials. It genuinely seems like the method of things to come. For instance, in 2016, a completely 3D printed Walker Connect was finished in Madrid. Another new innovation likewise aided the development of this extension. Robots. For this situation, they dissected how much weight the extension could bear. Yet, robots are beginning to be utilized in more everyday development measures as well. For example, laying blocks and pouring cement. At long last, Propels and biomimicry are encouraging us to utilize nature's sharp bioengineering to profit our own structures. Simply take Stuttgart's Landesgartenschau exhibition hall, which is designed according to the skeleton of an ocean imp. Like the imp, the design is domed and composed of fitted plates, which, in the construction's case, are made of pressed wood sheeting. The subsequent construction is both solid and light. Or then again take Phil Pernell, a teacher at the University of Leeds. He's chipping away at plans for robots that, similar to the white platelets in the human body, will break down shortcomings in the framework, along streets, for instance, and inside utility lines, so the important fixes can be made. It's difficult to foresee the eventual fate of designing, however. One thing is sure, on the off chance that we keep on improving, the principal restriction on the constructions of things to come will be our minds and desire. Final summary. The main message in this book. The works of art of current engineering are the finish of millennia of building experience. By better understanding this rich history, you can all the more likely appreciate the constructions around you, regardless of whether it's computing the powers that nature will apply on construction or dissecting the ground on which that design is to be assembled. A designer's work is a long way from a straightforward or ordinary one. Furthermore, for future designers outfitted with unexpected innovations, it appears to be that things will just get additionally energizing. You like what you hear? Check out other personal development or business books. This video was made possible by your support. It takes a very long time to make one of our videos. So thanks to your contributions to Patreon and watching our videos, we are slowly able to do more and more of them. If you want to help us out, check out the Patreon page. If you like the contents of this video, check out other books in the description and suggest what book we should cover next.